Picture a gladiator. Go on, picture him. With slabs of muscle, jaw like a brick, probably tearing into a leg of roasted boar before he walks into the arena to kill a man for entertainment. Now forget that image, because it's wrong. And the real story is so much weirder and so much smarter than the Hollywood version. In the 1990s, archaeologists cracked open a 2,000-year-old gladiator graveyard in Ephesus, Turkey. 67 bodies, real fighters, with the sword wounds and skull fractures to prove it. And when scientists ran isotope analysis on their bones, the same technique used to figure out what dinosaurs ate, they found something nobody expected. These men weren't eating meat. They were basically vegetarian. They were eating barley. And, bizarrely, they were drinking ash. On purpose. As a supplement. And here's the part that should make every gym bro flinch. Modern sports science is starting to admit they might have been onto something. We just spent 2,000 years ignoring it. Our whole idea of warrior nutrition runs on one assumption. Meat equals strength. Lift heavy, eat steak, get jacked. It's the bodybuilding Bible. And it's been the assumption since at least the Victorian era, when scholars looked back at antiquity and just assumed elite fighters ate like elite predators. But the Romans didn't write it that way. Roman writers had a nickname for gladiators, and it wasn't flattering. Hordearii, barley men, barley eaters. It shows up again and again in ancient sources, almost as an insult. The implication being that gladiators ate cheap, low-status food. Grain and beans, not meat and wine. For centuries, historians treated that as a footnote, a curiosity. Maybe gladiators were just poor. Maybe it didn't matter what they ate, since they were slaves and prisoners anyway, force-fed whatever was cheapest. Then the bones told a different story. A team out of the Medical University of Vienna, led by researchers Fabian Kanz and Karl Groschmidt, ran chemical analysis on the Ephesus skeletons. They measured stable carbon, nitrogen, and sulfur isotopes, along with strontium and calcium levels in the bone. Isotopes are basically a chemical receipt of everything you've eaten for years. Your bones literally remember your diet. The result, every individual studied, gladiators included, had a diet built around wheat and barley as the staple food. And the nitrogen signature, the marker that normally spikes when someone eats a lot of animal protein, was unusually low across the board. Researchers think that's because these men were eating a lot of legumes, beans, instead of meat. So the insult was true. They really were barley eaters. High carb, plant heavy, low animal protein. Sounds less like a Roman action hero and more like a 1990s endurance runner. But that's only half the story. Because a high carb, mostly plant diet should leave you with weak, brittle bones. Low calcium. And gladiators were doing the most violent, high-impact job on Earth. Their bones should have been falling apart. They weren't. This is where it gets genuinely strange. The strontium to calcium ratio in the gladiators' bones was significantly higher than in ordinary Ephesus citizens. That ratio is a chemical fingerprint for how you're getting your calcium. And the only thing that produces that exact fingerprint isn't dairy, and it isn't meat. It's ash. Roman texts mention fighters drinking a tonic made from burnt plant material, sometimes mixed with vinegar. For a long time, historians treated this as folklore, something you'd find next to rub bull semen on your face in an ancient self-help book. Charming nonsense, basically. Except the chemistry lines up perfectly. Burnt wood and bone ash are extremely rich in calcium. And one of the researchers described the calcium levels they found in these bones as nothing short of extreme compared to the general population. These guys were essentially mainlining a primitive electrolyte and mineral supplement after every training session to protect bone density and speed up healing from fractures. That's not superstition. That's periodized supplementation. 1,800 years before post-workout recovery shake was a phrase anyone used. They had identified a real physiological gap, a high-carb, low-meat diet that doesn't supply enough calcium for someone absorbing constant blunt trauma. And they patched it with the only calcium-dense substance they had reliable access to. It's crude. It's also correct. Here's the second gut punch to the steak and six-pack myth. Researchers studying these remains believe gladiators likely carried a noticeable layer of body fat. and that this wasn't an accident of their carb-heavy diet. It may have been the point. A thin layer of subcutaneous fat does something specific in a knife fight. It cushions superficial cuts, makes wounds look more dramatic without immediately exposing major blood vessels, nerves, or organs. Extra padding may have helped protect a gladiator's internal organs from the slashing, hacking violence of the arena. A visibly shredded fighter, paradoxically, was more exposed. Remember, most gladiator fights weren't to the death. They were a business. A dead gladiator was a financial loss for his trainer. The incentive wasn't to look like a Greek statue. It was to survive a show, bleed dramatically but not fatally, and fight again next season. In other words, their physique wasn't optimized for aesthetics. It was optimized for outcome. That's a body composition strategy, not a lack of discipline. So why did it take us 2,000 years and a graveyard full of bones to take any of this seriously? Partly because we've been writing history backwards. Renaissance and Victorian thinkers idolized Rome as an empire of warrior aristocrats, and they projected their own cultural obsession with meat as virility straight onto the gladiators. A high-carb plantain-bean diet didn't fit the fantasy, so it got filed away as a quirky footnote instead of a deliberate training protocol. Partly because gladiators were enslaved or low-status fighters, and for most of history nobody thought their diet plan was worth studying seriously. It was assumed to be whatever scraps they were given, not a system anyone designed on purpose. And partly because, until isotope analysis existed, there was simply no way to check. You couldn't interrogate a skeleton. You could only read what ancient authors wrote and guess. It took modern chemistry catching up to ancient bones before the truth could even be tested. Here's where this stops being a history lesson and starts being useful. Modern sports nutrition has slowly, awkwardly rediscovered almost every piece of this. Carb loading before high-output performance. Endurance athletes do it routinely. Calcium and mineral timing around heavy training. Every serious strength program now flags this as non-negotiable. Plant-based protein sources holding their own against animal protein for muscle maintenance. That debate has shifted enormously over the last decade. We didn't invent any of this from scratch. We re-derived it expensively after ignoring a graveyard that had been telling us the answer the whole time. The gladiators weren't lucky barbarians eating whatever scraps they could find. The chemistry in their bones shows a structured, high-carbohydrate, calcium-supplemented, deliberately fueled body, built by people who needed performance and recovery, fast, with zero margin for error. They just didn't have a word for periodization. They had a bowl of barley and a cup of ash. So next time someone tells you that real warriors only ate meat, you can tell them the actual warriors were drinking burnt wood for their bones and loading up on beans before a fight. History isn't always a fairy tale of strong men eating steak. Sometimes it's a forensic report. And this time, the forensic report agrees with your nutritionist. If this kind of science finally proves the ancients were right, rabbit hole is your thing, subscribe, because we're going to keep digging up bones, literally, to find out what they can teach modern fitness.